Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Global. We'll get you top stories from India and the region. I am Tanvi Taneja. And for news from the rest of the world, I'm joined by my colleague in London, Ollie Barrett.
Thanks, Tanvi. Coming up in international news, we'll look at who is and who isn't going to India's G20 summit. We've got an update on the Ukraine grain talks, and we'll hear about Indonesia's golden visa scheme. First, the headlines.
India's foreign minister says the G20 presidency is critical for bridging the north-south divide at the DD India conclave ahead of the upcoming G20 summit.
Divides, gaps.
Russia is open to discussions on the Black Sea grain deal, says President Putin in a meeting with his Turkish counterpart Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Sochi. Africa's first climate summit kickstarts in Nairobi. Leaders push for market-based financing tools such as carbon credits in a bid to mobilize funding. India's External Affairs Minister, Dr. S.Jaishankar, who was speaking at the DD India conclave Monday morning, said that the nation's G20 presidency is giving voice to the global south.
Is our presidency of the G20 important? The first reason is the environment. That the world environment today is very difficult. You have a very sharp east-west polarization. You have very big north-south divides, gaps. The second is, within this larger universe of problems, what are the priorities? And we have focused on the priorities using the concept of global south. And finally, what has been different the way we have done it. And I think a lot of it derives from Prime Minister Modi's belief in Jan Bhagidari.
Indian External Affairs Minister also said that there's a lot of global curiosity around India over the last decade. This is because of its long list of achievements.
An enormous curiosity in the world today, and I would say a growing respect in the world today about what it is that India has managed to do in the last decade. So when we tell people, and our numbers by any standards are mind-boggling. When you tell people, look, we don't worry, during that period, we actually, despite all those apocalyptic predictions about us, we actually kept up food support for such a large number, 800 million people.
The Indian Foreign Minister made a specific reference to India's digital transformation while speaking about its list of achievements.
Probably, if I were to single out one particular aspect of what we are doing, it is the digital. That our digital delivery, I think, is evoking a lot of respect. I mean, when you talk to people about cashless transactions, I mean, we are today 40 times the number of the US in terms of what we do.
Further, Indian External Affairs Minister Dr. S.Jaishankar also referred to the importance of millets. He said India's campaign of pushing the cultivation and consumption of millets has opened up a large untapped possibility to increase grain production.
The millet campaign, what you will see is that if you are going to increase grain production, here is a large untapped possibility. And when you travel around the world, I mean, for example, I've seen in Africa, a lot of African countries actually have grown up eating millets, by the way, just like we did. In our own lives, younger people would be surprised to know wheat really came in a big way in 1960s and 70s.
Next, more news of the upcoming G20 summit that will be held on September 9th and 10th in New Delhi. So tough negotiations continue on day 2 of the 4th and final meeting of the G20 Sherpas, which began on Sunday in Indian state of Haryana's Nuh. The meeting will lay down the final agenda for the upcoming G20 summit, which is scheduled to take place in Delhi on September 9th and 10th. Our correspondent Amritpal Singh reports from Nuh.
The fourth and the final meeting of the G20 Sherpas is currently underway here in Haryana's Nuh in the Mewat region. This meeting is pivotal because it will lay the final agenda before the leaders meet on the 9th and 10th of this month at the Bharat Mandapam in New Delhi. While there seems to be a consensus on many issues like women-led development, the need to accelerate sustainable development goals, technological transformation, creating a disaster-resilient infrastructure, digital public infrastructure, etc., but there remain points of divergences or differences, like the reform of multilateral institutions, including the UN Security Council. While most agree that there is a need to reform these institutions, but putting a definitive timeline is where consensus eludes them. The other big issue of divergence is the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict and how to deal with it. These Sherpas over the next 3 days are trying to see if they can evolve a consensus given the impact it's having on the most vulnerable countries which form the part of the global south, which India has been advocating during its presidency, that these countries, their aspirations and concerns need to be factored in the global governance architecture. With my colleague Jessica Taneja and cameraman Bhim Singh, this is Amritpal Singh for DD India in Nuh.
Now, digital public infrastructure, life, that's Mission Life, Lifestyle for Environment, Voice of Global South, traditional medicine, millets and more. So as the 4th Sherpa meeting commences in Haryana's Manesar, watch India's G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant speak on India's perspective of the G20 presidency.
So India's built a unique Indian narrative during its G20 presidency. I think the most critical one is the digital public infrastructure. Its definition and its framework has been accepted across G20. We've had the life principles of lifestyle for sustainability, which is very important because it will nudge people into adopting pro-planet behavior and building up a better world of tomorrow. And then there's been a lot of focus on traditional medicine. The health ministry and the G20 relating to health have focused on the traditional medicine sector in a big way. Then we've emphasized a lot our focus on new growth, Startup 20, the disaster risk resilience, which opened the door for discussion on all aspects relating to disasters and how to handle them. The Indian narrative also revolved around millets, which was a part of every single meal that we served, and there was a huge emphasis on focus on one district, one product, which formed a part of our gifts which were given to the visitors who came to India.
So on September 9th, the most powerful heads of state will meet in India for the annual G20 summit. Over 25 world leaders along with other delegates are going to attend this event. My colleague Ollie Barrett is in London. He tells us more on who's in and who's out. Let's go over to Ollie now. Ollie, over to you.
Thanks, Tanvi. Yes, Chinese President Xi Jinping will not be attending the G20 summit in India's capital, New Delhi, this week. In a brief statement by China's foreign ministry, Beijing said that the Chinese delegation to G20 will be led by Premier Li Qiang instead. No reason was given for the absence of the Chinese leader. Xi Jinping is the second world leader to confirm that they are skipping the G20 summit in India after Russia's Vladimir Putin. This move comes amid deteriorating relations between China and India. US President Joe Biden, meanwhile, says he's disappointed that his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping won't be at the G20 summit in New Delhi this week. Biden is due to arrive in India for a 3-day visit on Thursday.
I am disappointed, but I'm going to get to see him. Thank you.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has met Russian President Vladimir Putin in Russia's Black Sea resort of Sochi for discussions on the Black Sea grain deal. President Putin told Turkey's leader that Russia is open to further talks about the agreement that helped get Ukraine's grain to market and helped ease the global food crisis. Russia quit the deal in July, a year after it was brokered by the United Nations and Turkey, complaining that its own food and fertilizer exports faced difficulties.
We also have something to talk about from the point of view of ensuring security in the region. Of course, we will not ignore issues related to the Ukraine crisis. I know that you intend to raise the issue of the grain deal. We are open to negotiations on this issue.
In the context of Turkish-Russian relations during this visit, everyone is looking at the grain corridor issue. They're expecting what will come out about the grain corridor from here. The message that will be given to the world during the news conference after our meeting will be very, very important, especially the steps for less developed African countries.
Those talks came after Russia launched an air attack on one of Ukraine's biggest grain exporting ports. The attack was carried out at the Izmail port, one of the country's 2 major grain exporting facilities on the Danube River in the Odessa region. Ukraine's Air Force has urged residents of the Izmail port area to seek shelter. South Africa's president is refuting allegations that the country transported ammunition to Russia. Cyril Ramaphosa says the claim is baseless after an official inquiry found no evidence supporting the allegations. The claims sparked a diplomatic row and questioned South Africa's stance of non-alignment and neutrality in the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war.
From its investigation, the panel found no evidence that any cargo of weapons was loaded for export onto the ship Lady R. The panel found that there was no evidence to support the claim that the ship transported weapons from South Africa destined for Russia. When all matters are considered, none of the allegations made about the supply of weapons to Russia have been proven to be true, and none of the persons who made these allegations could provide any evidence to support the claims that had been leveled against our country.
A year and a half into Russia's invasion of Ukraine, its President Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, has sacked Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov, replacing him with Rustem Umerov. The change is yet to be approved by Parliament, but it is likely to be supported by a majority of Ukrainian lawmakers.
This week, the Parliament will be asked to make a staff-related decision. I would like to outline it now. I have decided to replace the Minister of Defense of Ukraine. Oleksiy Reznikov has been through more than 550 days of full-scale war. I believe that the ministry needs new approaches and other formats of interaction with both the military and society as a whole. Now Rustem Umerov should take over the ministry. The Ukrainian parliament knows this person well, and Mr. Umerov does not need any additional introduction. I expect the parliament to support this candidate.
Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has announced he's struck a deal with France to train fighter pilots. He says that during his conversation with French President Emmanuel Macron, the pair also discussed what Paris could do to help and protect Kiev further.
Ukraine has become stronger. We have new agreements with our partners on defense packages. And by the way, today in a conversation with French President Macron, we discussed which new deliveries can help our soldiers. We discussed the protection of our Odessa region, what France can do to protect Odessa and the region. And there is very important agreement on training of our pilots in France. Our coalition of modern fighters is becoming stronger.
Next to Central Africa, where Gabon's military leader, General Brice Oligui Nguema, has taken oath as transitional president of the coup-hit country. Gabon's junta seized power in a coup last month, ousting longtime President Ali Bongo. The swearing-in of the general took place at the Constitutional Court. The United Nations, African Union and the West have all urged the junta to restore democratic rule in the country. The coup leaders, though, say they won't rush to hold elections. The military takeover of Gabon is the 8th seizure of power in West and Central Africa in the last 3 years. Indonesia says it will launch a golden visa scheme to attract foreign individuals and corporate investors. The move is aimed at boosting the Southeast Asian nation's economic development. DD India's Patrick Fock has more from Singapore.
Well, these golden visas Indonesia is offering will allow foreign investors to gain either a 5 or 10-year residence permit. For a 5-year permit, investors will need to set up a company worth at least $2.5 million, and the sum for a 10-year permit will be at least $5 million. Indonesia's Director General of Immigration said that because Indonesia only wanted to attract quality investors, the scheme had to be quite thorough. That was possibly a reference to a lot of the criticism that's been directed at golden visa schemes in other countries and places like the EU, where there have been growing calls for such visas to be scrapped altogether, partly because of the use of them by criminals and oligarchs, for example, to buy their way into European countries. They've also been blamed for soaring house prices and lax regulation in many countries.
That's it from me here in London. Tanvi, back to you in the studio in Delhi.
Thank you, Oli. You're watching DD India Global, still to come on the show. Kenya's president urges Africa to seize climate financing opportunities at the continent's first climate summit. And NASA's SpaceX Crew 6 has returned home to Earth after conducting vital research.
Welcome to Jaipur.
You're watching DD India Global. I am Tanvi Taneja. Another round of trade talks between India and the UK begin on Monday as efforts intensify to bring a free trade agreement over the line. Officials say they are hopeful that the deal will be finalized soon. DD India correspondent Megumi Lim reports from London.
Well, this will be the 13th round of talks between India and the UK. The British government is hoping the deal will help reduce tariffs on key exports such as cars, legal services and whiskey. And India is hoping to increase visa access to the UK for skilled workers in IT and healthcare. The UK is the largest European market for IT services from India, but the possibility of more migration from India to the UK has been a sticky issue throughout negotiations. It is a politically sensitive topic in Britain, where the government has vowed to bring down net migration. Another hurdle that has come up recently is concerns over conflict of interest. Some members of parliament in the UK have called for Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to be more transparent about his family's financial interests in India. Sunak's wife owns shares worth more than $600 million in Indian IT services company Infosys, which could stand to benefit from the FTA. But officials are optimistic that these issues can be resolved on the sidelines of the upcoming G20 summit, which will take place in New Delhi from September 9th. The deal is aimed at doubling bilateral trade between the UK and India by the year 2030. In the year to March, more than $20 billion in goods and services was traded between the two countries. Megumi Lim in London reporting for DD India.
Next news of the 43rd ASEAN Summit. As members of the ASEAN countries meet in the Indonesian capital of Jakarta, top Southeast Asian diplomats are set to review the regional bloc's stalled peace plan for Myanmar. It comes against the backdrop of violence in Myanmar for more than 2 years after the country's military seized power in a coup there. Myanmar is a member of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, also known as ASEAN, but the country's military junta has been kept out of the top bloc's meetings since it ousted Aung San Suu Kyi's elected government in 2021. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi will visit Jakarta on September 6th and 7th to attend the ASEAN India and East Asia summits. Leaders from the United States, China, Japan, South Korea, Australia and other partner countries will also be participating in this summit. Next news of Africa's first climate summit. Kenyan President William Ruto has kicked off Africa's first climate summit in Nairobi on Monday. President Ruto urged the delegates to look upon the climate crisis as an opportunity for the continent to attract billions of dollars into investment.
We have ample renewable energy potential as well, and the natural assets and resources to green our own consumption, but also to meaningfully contribute to decarbonization of the global economy.
4 astronauts have returned home from a 6-month stay on the International Space Station, ISS. The SpaceX Crew Dragon capsule carrying astronauts from the United States, the UAE and Russia splashed down off the coast of Florida on Monday. The members of the Crew 6 mission, run jointly by NASA and SpaceX, spent their 6 months conducting vital research on human health and monoclonal antibodies. They also investigated how wave turbulence in space affects fuel in satellites. And India are taking on Nepal at the Pallakele International Stadium currently in the Asia Cup cricket tournament. Indian skipper Rohit Sharma won the toss and elected to bowl first. Nepal started their innings on a positive note as the opening duo of Kushal Bhurtel and Asif Sheikh added 65 runs for the opening wicket. Kushal made 38 runs before being removed by Shardul Thakur. Currently, Nepal are batting on 144 for the loss of 6 wickets. This is a must-win match for both the teams in order to book a place in the Super 4. And on to cycling. Germany's Leonard Kamna soloed to victory on stage 9 of the Vuelta a España. To complete his set of wins in Grand Tours, American Sepp Kuss retained the overall leader's red jersey. In tennis, Yelena Ostapenko stunned world number 1 Iga Swiatek as her US Open title defense ends in heartbreak. Novak Djokovic, Francis Tiafoe, Taylor Fritz and Ben Shelton have reached the New York quarterfinals.
Novak Djokovic beat Croatian qualifier Borna Gojo 6-2, 7-5, 6-4 in the fourth round of the US Open, winning his 85th career win at the last Grand Slam tournament of the year. Tyler Fritz has reached the quarterfinals, beating Swiss qualifier Dominic Streaker 7-6, 6-4, 6-5. The number 9 seed has won his first ever US Open quarterfinal spot. American Francis Tiafoe won against Australian wildcard Rinky Hijikata 6-4, 6-1, 6-4 to set a quarterfinal clash against Ben Shelott. Coco Gauff beat Caroline Wozniacki 6-3, 3-6, 6-1 for the quarterfinal spot. Coco Gauff is the first American teen since Serena Williams to reach the US Open quarterfinal 2 years in a row. Jelena Ostapenko continued her mastery over world number 1 Iga Swiatek with a 3-set win to reach her first US Open quarterfinals 3-6, 6-3, 6-1.
So that's all we have for you in this edition of DD India Global. Do let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. You can connect with us on Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, Instagram and YouTube at DD India Live. That's all from us here from the New Delhi studios. It's time to bid goodbye to you. Namaskar.